Hi friends, welcome back. I love to have you back here. If you're new, hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm a language enthusiast, and on this channel I give advice on how to best learn a language. Last week I was talking to you about my language learning plans for 2023, and in this video what I want to do is teach you how to create your own plan from scratch, no matter your experience with learning languages. So without further ado, let's get started. Step number 1 is to determine how many languages you want to learn. This is very important because it's going to affect every single step that you take in your plan from here on. So how many do you want to learn? If you're new to my channel, you've never been here, you might be like, what? You can learn several at the same time? I thought that was a bad idea. No, it's not a bad idea. It's just something that people love saying that it's a bad idea, but I completely disagree with that. And I made a video explaining why I disagree with it. Gonna pop on the screen. And then I also made another one that's telling you how to learn several at the same time. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and pause this video, watch those, come back, or just like check them out later. But in any case, I'm not gonna rehash why I think it's okay to learn several at the same time. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that these videos exist and that you can look it up if you're interested to know why. But that being said, it's very important to be extremely clear with yourself right from the beginning. Do I learn one at a time or do I learn multiple? Because that's going to affect how you schedule, how you plan. So get clear. How many can you afford to learn? At this stage, it's just going to be a rough idea. Later, when we go through the other steps of the plan, you're going to have a clearer idea of whether that was a good call or not. But right in the beginning, get a rough idea. Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Or is it perhaps even more? Just a rough idea of like how many things you have going on in your life and what you can realistically dedicate to language learning. And when I say dedicate, it doesn't have to be a lot. 15 to 20 minutes study sessions are totally fine, as are 2-hour study sessions, whatever works for you. But just make sure that you are clear on the number, or at least a little bit clear in the beginning and then crystal clear at the end. As I said, we're gonna go through the steps together. Got it? Good. Next step is, once you've picked the language or languages, you pick resources. So what do you want to use for your language? And here's the thing, when it comes to that, it sounds simple. That's because it's simple, but it's not easy. It's not always easy to pick resources. So you begin by determining what you like and what works for you. And ideally, your resources will be both stuff you like and stuff that work for you. To give an example, I would hate to start with something auditory, like an auditory course. Not because I don't do auditory stuff, like I do use podcasts and music as part of my language learning. So it's not that, it's just I just can't stand when they're giving me the basics in an auditory way. When they're teaching me how to say hi, how are you? In an auditory way, and I can't see it written down. I need to have both auditory and visual input in the beginning. It's very important for me to read and listen. And then after, when I'm past the beginning stage, I can only read, only listen, whatever. But just auditory sucks for me, truly. So I know that that would never work. And it's important to know your own learning preferences and like what works for you. I feel like all of the senses work for all of us, but for some of us, we're more focused on one than the other. So know what works for you and you pick those resources, and then you also pick resources that you enjoy. So it's important to invest some time to research each resource so that you know it's going to be stuff that you like and not stuff that you absolutely hate. Now, knowing what you like is a little bit easier than knowing what works for you. So if you've never really done this before, if you're new to language learning and you're like, how do I know what works for me? Or if you've done it before and it didn't work out for you with whatever resources you were using, you might be asking yourself the question right now, how do I know what works for me? And this is where I think it's very important to borrow a little bit from the business world. If you've been on my channel before, you know that that's my background. And in particular, think of it a little bit as agile project management. So that's an iterative approach to manage a project, right? If you are thinking of building some piece of software, you're constantly incorporating customer feedback, for example, constantly making changes. That's what being agile, that's what that word means in the description of agile project management. You want to be adaptable, you want to do iterations, you don't want to be on a linear path. The same thing in language learning. You try it out, you want to be agile, you want to do those iterations in terms of you try out a resource, you see how it goes, you reevaluate, you're like, okay, it doesn't work, let me try out another one. That's what you do if you don't know what is best. You just kind of keep going through these iterations. You are not afraid to kick a resource to the side if you find that you're no longer enjoying it or it doesn't work, and just keep going and going until you figure out what works for you. But you try and test it like one at a time. I wouldn't suggest testing language learning resources like several at a time, but that's a good way to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. Next step of picking resources is to determine what you need based on your goals, because we all have very, very different goals. And for some of us that want to actually go to school in a foreign country, we're going to need a lot of that highly complex academic, scientific language, etc. If all you want to do is travel, you're going to need a different set of vocabulary, a different set of skills. If you want to read literature in its original form, then that's another skill. So I feel like you don't necessarily have to be able to do everything in a certain language. There's only so much time, and especially if you want to learn multiple languages, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. So pick your resources based on them getting you quickly to what you want to be able to do with that language. Perhaps you're like, I want to be able to do everything with it eventually. Yeah, sure, perhaps that's the case, but what do you want to do the most? Pick the resources that are going to get you there, and then you can change and add other resources that are going to get you to be able to do everything if that's what you want to go for. Another very important component is to determine resources based on your level. Now that is huge, because I'm trying to make this video as open as possible in terms of, I don't know what your language learning plan is. Perhaps you're already intermediate level and you're making a plan to get to advanced. Perhaps we're talking about a plan from scratch. So your resources should be optimized to your level. They should always be a little bit beyond your reach, but not too complex. If you are using a resource that is overly complicated, like a fiction book when you're a beginner, you're gonna get discouraged. I just don't see anybody that can make this work. But if you're using something that's too easy for you because you've already kind of taken a little bit of that language and you use something that's like very basic and beginner level, then obviously that's not going to work either. So you need to pick some things that are challenging. They are difficult, but not overtly difficult. They're just beyond your comfort zone, just beyond your reach, so that you're learning every single day, but it's not like 90% of stuff is just unrecognizable and you don't know where to even begin. And the last thing when it comes to resources is be restrictive. Perhaps if you are already a subscriber, you're surprised by this, because you know that I don't recommend restricting yourself when it comes to, if you want to learn 5 languages time, do it. So I don't usually recommend restrictiveness, but in this case, I think it's a good thing. I think when it comes to resources, you'd want to limit yourself. You don't want to have too many at the same time, especially as a beginner. If you're already intermediate, advanced, you can be a bit more flexible with that, but resource overwhelm is a big deal as a beginner, and it can hamper our language learning. So from personal experience, trust me, if you have too many resources, you're kind of all over the place, your learning isn't very focused, and you're not progressing as quickly as you'd like to be. So pick a limited number of resources. Just picking one is actually fine in the very beginning if you're a total beginner. You don't have to stick with one. You can have like 2, for example. Just like really limit those resources, especially if you're not at the intermediate level yet. And even then, it's good to practice limiting your resources. It's good to not get overwhelmed. There's not a magic number on the different stages, like you should have 1 as a beginner, 5 as there's not such a magic number, but limit your resources as much as you can. It's gonna help you in terms of progressing more quickly. Step number 3 is to look at your schedule and be mindful of your schedule. There's so many things that you can have in your life that are just taking a lot of your time, be it your social life, your hobbies, your work, your kids, whatever. So a lot of the time you need to have good planning if you want to succeed in learning a language. You need to look at your schedule and be like, what can I realistically afford to learn? So this will help you in terms of how many hours or minutes to allocate per week, per day, whatever, however you want to look at it. Because in language learning, consistency is very important. You don't have to study every day, but it has to be consistent. You can't just study once a month. So you're going to have to look at your schedule and see where you can fit that in. And we can circle back to step number 1 of determining the number of languages you want to learn, because now you have the resources figured out and you're looking at your schedule and you can be like, okay, realistically, this was a good idea from step number 1, or let me add a language, or let me subtract the language. Go back to step number 1 and refine the number of languages after you look at your schedule. Just be realistic about what you can commit to in terms of regular language study, because you don't want to just learn once in a blue moon, because then you're going to have to relearn the same things. It's very easy, especially as a beginner, to forget what you've learned, and so you can't afford to just like a lesson in a month. That's just not gonna work. So again, in this stage, just figure out what works for your schedule, set a certain schedule in terms of learning your language, and then go back, reevaluate the number of languages that you promised yourself in step 1. Here in step 3, kind of go back and see if it works. Step 4 is an optional step. It is to create milestones and goals. The reason it's optional is because it doesn't work for all personality types, but for many people it can be helpful in language learning. I certainly come across more people for whom it's helpful than for whom it's not. So if you're interested to do that, here's how it goes. It's very important to have those little milestones and victories kind of that you set along the way, because it can keep you motivated, but it can also help you be more disciplined and stick to your routine, stick to your schedule. When you have some goals in terms of, I want to be able to read Dostoevsky, for example, or I want to be able to have a conversation when I'm on vacation in the Caribbean. Having those goals, they are going to help you keep your objectives in mind. They're going to help you stick to learning the language. So for many people, truly, it can be transformational and it can be very helpful. Set those milestones. They don't have to be big ones like the ones that I just mentioned, but start big. Start with the big goals and then see what kind of little milestones you can have along the way. Break them down into those little moments and little wins. And then you're going to be able to work towards that, and it's going to help you both with discipline and motivation. Speaking of motivation, step number 5 is to create motivation boosters. I recommend this for everybody. It's good to have those motivation boosters. It's good to have this vision of why you want to learn a language. So the reason I'm saying it's good to have it in your language learning plan is because then you don't have to come up with a motivation booster when you lose motivation, which is going to happen. Trust me, it happens to us all. So when that happens, you're not going to have to struggle to find your motivation. It's just super helpful if it's already in your language learning plan. So plan for failure, because yeah, there's going to be a shortage of motivation at some point. And if you want to get it back, it's very helpful to have that little plan. Does giving yourself a reward boost your motivation? Decide upon that upfront. Or perhaps are you studying Vietnamese and is going to a Vietnamese restaurant help kind of jumpstart that motivation again? Or perhaps is travel gonna help re-spark it? Whatever it might be for you, set those boosters and kind of have them in a little list somewhere. Whenever you lose motivation, you can go back and you can be like, oh, okay. Or keep them in your head. That's also another idea, but just kind of know what makes you motivated, so that when you do lose motivation, which is going to happen inevitably, you're not scratching your head figuring out how to get it back, but you already outlined those little boosters and you can go ahead and do them and implement them and see if that works. And last step number 6, is to continuously reassess your goals, your progress, your resources, kind of going back to that concept of agile project management that I was talking about earlier in this video. It is super important to be able to reassess. And that for me is part of your plan. It's part of your language learning plan, because your plan should not be set in stone. It should be a living, breathing document or piece of paper, or like a train of thoughts in your head if you didn't put it down anywhere, but it should be flexible. It should be able to change. It should be agile. You should be reevaluating what you're doing. You can go back and check in on your progress, and depending on your progress, you're changing resources because they're no longer difficult for you. Or you can go back and look on your goals and you can be like, actually, I no longer care about using that language in an academic setting. I'm just going to be picking up the business language side of it. Or actually, for me, it's no longer important to get fluent. I'm okay with just being intermediate. And that's going to change your plan. That's going to change your schedule, your resources, everything we talked about. So track your progress, see your goals, where you want to be, have those changed, reassess that, ask yourself that question periodically. And then also kill some resources if they're not useful. It's not just about am I no longer at that level, it's also about did that work? Was that resource even useful? Did I enjoy it? If not, get rid of it. Just make sure that this plan is not set in stone. Constantly reassess and reevaluate. That's what's going to help you be a much more efficient language learner that also enjoys the process much more, and it's going to take you to new heights with your languages. As always, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, if you have any tips on how you create your own language learning plans. I love to foster a community here where people can learn from each other, so the comment section is always a place I look at. It's always a place where I like to respond and, you know, engage with people so that we can find the best tips and tricks in terms of learning languages. So do let me know in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, of course, and then also subscribe to my channel if you want to support me. It truly helps me as a creator. I will see you here next week on Wednesday again, and until then I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. See you soon.